accepted our invitation to deliver the keynote address at the HaShoah commemoration in 2020, but regrettably he was unable to do so that year due to the COVID restrictions. We're grateful that His Honour is able this year, however, to be with us tonight to present the keynote address and perhaps make a little clearer to us why never again is now.
Thank you, Sol, and thank you all for the honour and the privilege of the opportunity to address you this evening on Yom HaShoah. Tonight we commemorate and honour the memory of the 6 million sons and daughters of Israel murdered in the Shoah and the countless others persecuted, displaced and killed in the name of an ideology that was but the extreme manifestation of an ancient hatred that has long blackened and continues to blacken the human heart. It is characteristic of the generosity and life-giving spirit of the Jewish community that it should invite me, a Gentile, to offer this reflection on this most important and solemn evening. And what is more, to invite a member of the Christian Church, a church whose sons and daughters have in the past been responsible for their share of anti-Judaism and on whose present sons and daughters' conscience rests its own call to repentance. Tonight's commemoration seeks to bring together the past, the present, and the future. As a commemoration of the victims of the Shoah, we call to mind the past and we call for the past never to be forgotten. We call to mind the human face of each and every individual man, woman and child persecuted and murdered in the Shoah, and to the survivors, those still with us and those who live in our memories. Our commemoration of the past, of course, necessarily looks forward to the future. Without memory, as Ellie Wiesel reminds us, there would be no future. It is, however, the present that is the principal theme of this year's commemoration of Yom HaShoah. Never again is now. It is the present, now, for which our memory of the Shoah is so urgently needed. And that is because the anti-Semitism that was at the centre of the Holocaust and at the centre of Nazi ideology has once again emerged in our own world. Never again is now, because it is now that we can see the spoiled seed of anti-Semitism sprouting anew. In new and different forms, no doubt, but still unmistakable as hatred for Jews as Jews. While it would no doubt have been familiar to the victims of the pogroms and the persecutions of the past, what strikes us again today is the way in which anti-Semitism has been able to adapt itself to the language and culture of our own age. It has always done this, of course. For millennia, anti-Semitism has reappeared time and again under the guise of whatever happens to be the dominant cultural category of the age. In the 20th century, following the rise of discredited pseudo-scientific theories that began in the 17th century, the dominant cultural category was, of course, that of race. And so race was the category into which Nazi ideology was poured and in which it found its expression. As historian Dan Stone recently wrote, race provided a kind of unifying framework for the Third Reich. The great Anglo-American poet W.H. Auden saw this in 1940 on the eve of the Shoah in his poem Diaspora. Viewing the refugee crisis of that time from afar, Auden said of the personification of the Jewish people, how he survived them they could never understand. No worlds they drove him from were ever big enough. And he fulfilled the role for which he was designed. On heat with fear, he drew their terrors to him, till there was no place left where they could still pursue him, except that exile which he called his race. But envying him even that, they plunged right through him into a land of mirrors without time or space, and all they had to strike now was the human face. For Auden then, once the illusions and lies of racism were stripped away, all that remained of the one being persecuted was the human face, as if in a mirror. In this way, racism can and should be understood as being at its heart the denial of humanity, not only of the persecuted, but of the persecutor as well. And so after the horrors of the Holocaust, when the world looked to find expression to the need to rid humanity of the hatred that lay behind it, it was unsurprising that the international community would itself employ race as the category by which it sought to renounce such hatred, as it did in the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Thus, while it was specifically incidents of anti-Semitism that prompted the creation of that convention in the early 1960s, the convention itself did not specifically refer to anti-Semitism, but it expressed its condemnation of all forms of racial discrimination in perfectly general terms, emphasising the dignity and equality inherent in all human beings. And as well it should. Racial discrimination and racial hatred are abhorrent in whatever form they take and must be condemned whenever and wherever we find them. Nevertheless, it is important that we recognise that anti-Semitism itself has a longer history than discredited and abhorrent racial theories. And indeed, anti-Semitism has a longer history than the social construction of race itself. Given that longer history and what we now see in our world today, we might reasonably observe that Nazi anti-Semitism was not so much its particular form of racism, but rather that Nazi racial mysticism and racial theories were its particular form of anti-Semitism, and that anti-Semitism has continued to persist in new guises long after those racial theories have been discredited and condemned. Indeed, remarkably in our age, anti-Semitism now presents itself as a form of anti-racism. Jewish identity and Jewish self-determination are each now perversely condemned as a form of racism, in which anti-Zionism is the new category into which hatred of Jews is channeled. It is important to stress that this is anti-Semitism's new face, not merely because the large majority of the Jewish people support the existence of an independent Jewish state and so may properly be described as Zionists. It is more visceral than that. In the anti-Semitism of our time, the word Zionist has simply become a stand-in, a code word for the word Jew. The anti-Semitism of our age, therefore, presents itself as the height of social justice through a combination of ancient prejudice historical amnesia, and self-congratulatory activism. And it is refracted through a media and social media environment that thrives on misinformation, manipulation, and lies, as prejudice and hate always have. And so, our commemoration of the darkness of the Shoah this year must acknowledge and recognise the darkness of our own time and the new threats to the Jewish people as a people. And the memory of the darkness of the Shoah must cause us to strengthen our resolve to repeat and repeat, never again. Never again is now. And we can and must have confidence in our resolve. Because for all the darkness of our age, Yisrael Kai, the people of Israel live. That was, of course, the proclamation that followed the first Shabbat service at the liberated Bergen-Belsen concentration camp on the 20th of April 1945. Yisrael Kai. And it became famous as the call for freedom for Soviet Jewry in the years that followed. It is a proclamation that is urgently needed today. The Jewish people live. Importantly, when that army chaplain at the liberation of Bergen-Belsen proclaimed Yisrael Kai, it was a cry not simply that some individual Jews had survived the horror of the Shoah. It was rather an emphatic cry that the Jewish nation itself, the people that have been known as Israel for thousands of years, lives in the fullest sense of the word. As it has for thousands of years, that nation thrives and it flourishes and it carries through time a spirit of resilience, of hope, and of humanity. I had the privilege to witness that spirit in Jerusalem during Purim last year as the Jewish people celebrated the triumph of resilience and hope and humanity in the face of another persecution of the past. And people from all nations, races, and creeds were brought into and shared that celebration. A shared celebration of resilience in the face of persecution. And I've witnessed that spirit more recently, where despite the agony and pain of war and rising anti-Semitism in our own country, the Jewish community have continued to gather to celebrate with prayer and song, weddings, family, children, and community life, all pointing to a shared future as a people and as a nation. It is fitting then that we gather here tonight at Carmel School, where the future can be seen in the faces of the children, some of whom are here tonight, including Aaron and Ezra, who gave us the beautiful rendition of Shema Israel earlier. Those children are those who will take the spirit of the Jewish nation forward. And it is that spirit of resilience, of hope and of humanity that tonight, in the shadow of the Shoah and all of its victims, proclaims, never again is now. And it is a proclamation that must not be confined to the Jewish people. All persons of goodwill must be heard to proclaim, never again is now. Never again is now must be proclaimed not only by those whose forebears were the victims of the Shoah, but also by those whose forebears carried attitudes or prejudices that contributed to anti-Semitism in the past, or who remain silent in the face of the persecution of their fellow human beings. We must all remember that it is our shared humanity that is at stake too. Thank you again for the invitation to address you on this most solemn night. I'm sure that I speak for all of the people of the nations gathered here in solidarity with the children of Israel when I repeat, in the words of another Gentile, the Moab woman Ruth, "Never let me abandon you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there be buried. May the Lord do thus and thus to me and more, if even death separates me from you."